Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation today. My name is Robert Ping. I work for Research Technologies, a division of University Information Technology Services at Indiana University and a center in the Pervasive Technology Institute. I am happy to be your logistical host today. I'm going to hand it off right away because we have a full hour that we would like to present to you with some questions and answers at the end. We would like to ask that everybody please hold your questions. We will be watching chat. So if you think of something as the presentation is happening, please put your questions in the chat window and we will be gathering those together and we will leave time at the end of the presentation to answer those questions. So without further ado, I want to hand over actually one last item. We are recording today and that recording will be available within a week or less on our YouTube channel, which is available through pti.iu.edu and also rt.iu.edu, and that's in the footer. Just click on the YouTube channel icon down there and the presentation will be available. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Stephanie Cox. She is going to send us on our way and have a great presentation today, everyone.
Thank you, Robert. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out to join us today. We are redoing a presentation that we did for EDUCAUSE back in the fall. And EDUCAUSE was just cool enough to group us with a university, a very fine university up the road. So Notre Dame was also asked to do a joint presentation. We are excited to tell our two stories or two tales of what happened during the transition to remote learning, the early parts of COVID-19. So I'm going to introduce all of my esteemed colleagues here today. I'm Stephanie Cox, and I manage the IU Anywhere platform, which is our virtual application and desktop platform here at Indiana University. I hand over to my colleague, Maggie. Yeah.
Hi, everybody. I'm Maggie Rickey. I'm the Principal Online Instructional Technologist with e-learning design and services. I've worked with Stephanie for several years on specialized virtual desktops for online courses, and I'm also a Chromebook user, but we'll maybe get a little more on that later.
I'm Kevin Strite, project manager at University of Notre Dame. I've been at Notre Dame for the last 10 years. And the last 2 years, I've been focused on as program manager for our virtual desktop infrastructure program.
Hi, folks. I'm Brandon Rich. I've been with the University of Notre Dame since 2005. I started in applications development, integration. I've been a technical architect through our Cloud First program. And as of a couple years ago, I'm now an enterprise architect. And I'm starting to think maybe I should have fed my cats before we started this.
Hi, I'm Matt Decker. I am the manager of student technology computing for Indiana University.
Thank you, everyone. So we're going to just kick this off with Notre Dame. And the question we posed is, where were you in mid-March of 2020? You want to take it away, Kevin?
Actually, I'm going to jump in there, Kevin, if that's all right. Yeah, so cast your mind back, if it's not too stressful, to March of 2020. We've all got our tales from that time period, and Notre Dame is no different. This is a story of how we went to virtual labs at a time when we were rapidly going to remote classroom instruction. And before we get into the particulars, how about a little bit about Notre Dame? So just to give you a sense of the proportion and scale here, we are just under 9,000 undergrads, around 4,000 grad students. We've got 8 colleges and schools. We've got our science, college, business, law school, that sort of thing. Mostly centralized, moderately centralized, you might say, under the Office of Information Technology. But we have IT directors throughout the colleges, which will come into play as part of this story. Our history is that our infrastructure is mostly cloud first, like I mentioned. This is a journey that we started back in about 2013, 2014. We started to explore moving to the cloud for a number of reasons. You know, this is really something that was starting to come into prominence in tech, and we had some great contacts that, you know, showed us how the kinds of things that might be possible in a cloud-first environment. We also had some challenges that we'd experienced with our world-facing front page. You know, major events happened that took our site down. We didn't want to have that happen anymore. So we started to look into what could the cloud offer us in terms of, you see here, scalability, agility, resiliency. And these were our kind of watchwords for what this migration would look like. We set a goal to move 70% of our services to the cloud within 3 years. And then Harvard went higher, so we went to 80% because we just wanted, I guess, a higher number. I don't know. It was a big goal, and we did it. In 3 years, we were all in on the cloud. So as part of that, and especially sort of afterward, you know, it was largely a lift and shift. We evaluated all of our services, some things that we could retire, some things that needed refactoring, but for the most part, you know, we're running sort of a data center in the cloud, really, and we were able to dismantle our data center and be cloud native. But we knew we had more to do, you know, after that big milestone was hit. So we established 4 pillars of areas that we wanted to continue to invest in. You can see them here: storage, research, media, and VDI. And it's that last pillar that we're going to talk to you about today. It's virtual desktop infrastructure, which is anytime that you are streaming essentially a desktop or an application to your browser, it's not running on your local machine, but you're interacting with it over the internet, that is VDI. So if you fast forward from there to, I guess, pre-pandemic, summer of 2019, we had one of those campus partners, one of those satellite IT offices that I mentioned in engineering and science computing, starting to explore an on-premises solution for VDI using VMware Horizon, using Dell hardware. I really want to give a lot of credit to the director over there, because this is someone who had a vision for the ways that VDI could really be transformative for our students. But of course, because we have this cloud first ethos, we wanted to see what are the possibilities for doing that in the cloud. So we thought, let's see if we can kind of hitch along on this platform, sorry, on this pilot, and try some of the Amazon VDI offerings. And if you look at what those are, there are really 2 main things. There's Amazon Workspaces and Amazon AppStream. The thing about Workspaces is it's a full desktop, and it's a persistent thing. It's one-to-one. So we would spin one up, we would provision it to you, you would log into it as though it were like a remote desktop, you know, kind of Windows machine. Name changes you would make, it would continue, and it would be just yours. AppStream is quite a different paradigm. You get an instance that is ephemeral. When you're done with it, your session closes, whether you close it yourself or it times out, it goes away. Any changes that you've made to the hard drive, you know, files that you've saved, those go away. You know, there are some ways that you can carve out little bits of persistent space, or you can do like we did and use cloud storage. But it's a big difference from the Workspaces model, because you're sort of working with the entire fleet rather than a machine at a time. It means you can be very elastic, you can scale up, scale down in response to events or demand. And it also means that every time you log in, you get a new fresh instance. So you're sort of back to a static configuration, which can be really great for kind of managing configuration drift, troubleshooting things. We like to say the AppStream is like the Little Caesars hot and ready model. They just queue up more pizzas for whenever demand will surge. So we did a pilot of AppStream with engineering and science students, and stood up a pilot, I would say about around 10 apps in engineering and science classes, had about 300 students. Basically, we want to see, could you get a good experience, you know, with these graphically intensive products that they use, like SolidWorks. Could you run SolidWorks on an iPad? And yeah, you basically can. You become pretty much device agnostic when you're using these technologies. which means that you open up a lot of options for students and faculty as to where they can be and where they can do the computing that they depend on. So good things came out of this pilot. We got a lot of great feedback. As I mentioned, you can access this stuff from anywhere. It doesn't matter what kind of device that you're on or where you are. As long as you've got a good internet connection, you can do it. You're cross-platform, which is something I know will come up later, but it means that you're not restricted anymore. If you are a Mac user and your class is dependent on Windows software, you're not stuck being unable to do that on your own device. And we got a lot of good responses from faculty and students. We heard, hey, this saved me a ton of time. I didn't have to go to the engineering building, to finish my assignment late at night or in the cold. SolidWorks on a Mac was huge, which is something they hadn't experienced before. Faculty are telling us it's extremely important to move forward. These are the kind of comments we got back. Now, we weren't without challenges in this pilot. One of the things is AppStream and the iteration we were working with at the time required you to essentially kind of handcraft each application. You need to install it, go through an optimization step, and then deploy it. Because the original version of AppStream sort of gave you one app at a time. There was no concept of seeing a desktop. You would engage with one at a time, and that was also how we deployed it. And it was a pretty slow iteration process. You didn't get a lot of feedback as an engineer if something went wrong. You just kind of had to dig through logs, see if you could find anything useful, and try again, and do this for every application. Our campus lab images, in contrast to this pilot, have over 100 applications. So that iteration time, loading, testing, optimizing, get an error, try again until it works, was really time consuming. So anyway, despite those challenges, we did make a decision to move forward because we saw that there were some really great benefits for classrooms, especially ones that depended on some of those resource-intensive applications. It takes time away from instructors who are having to do troubleshooting. It makes things readily available to students. It sort of shifts provisioning to your IAM system because you just have to add people to groups to make software available. So we had success. We wanted to move forward. We're talking about a program. We're thinking on the order of months. In conversations with our lead desktop engineer about how feasible this would be to do our campus lab images with all those applications on AppStream, he basically said, there is no way. And then it was March.
This is where I'll pick it up here, because this is really when I got involved with the project. So March 2020, we all remember COVID hits. So campuses around the country are beginning to put together their emergency response plan. Students were on spring break, which was extended by a week to buy us all a little bit of extra time. And at Notre Dame, our own VDI task force was put together to see if we really could put our lab image out there into AppStream. And it was one of those last times, you can see the picture there, that we were packed in this little war room of sorts till we all realized that that's probably not such a great idea. And we were all sent home, and life after that was pretty much like this on Zoom. So students were on spring break, and we had to figure out in a very short period of time how we could deliver 100+ software to students so that they could continue their coursework remotely over the next several weeks. So the clock was ticking, and we really felt like this scene here from Apollo 13, where we were being asked to do something that we had previously determined was not really going to be possible, and we had to do it in a really short amount of time. So going back to the options, we had Workspaces, which we already knew with the persistent one-to-one relationship like Brandon was talking about, but how could we provision these with the unknown demand? I mean, we had 12,000 students, and we surely weren't going to provision 12,000 different workspaces. That just would not make sense, and it would be cost prohibitive. And then we looked at AppStream, and we said, well, it took us a whole semester to load 10 applications. How are we going to get that 100+ applications in their own time? And then we said, well, we could go old school, like the RDP method of having our physical computer labs provision in RDP fashion where students could log in that way. And we had Sassafras, which was they rolled out an option as a response to COVID. And they said we could serve up these students fairly easily. But we didn't know what the demand was going to be. And most importantly, it really did not meet our strategic direction at that time. And throughout this whole process, as we were sitting around there talking, we had this push and pull of, do we respond rapidly and do what we need to do quick and dirty, or do we really want to keep our eyes on the future and try to do what was the most strategic approach. Well, thankfully, we came across a little known feature. It was a preview feature in AppStream called desktop mode. And it was formally released then in the fall of 2020, but it paved the way for everything to come together. Desktop view allowed us to expose the underlying Windows desktop as an actual application in the AppStream tray. And very quickly, we figured out that you could enable desktop mode in Image Builder and then start installing apps with SCCM using task sequences that were already built for our physical labs. So it sidestepped the whole painful app optimization process, which really became a major light bulb moment for us. And boom, we jumped to light speed and very quickly had our physical lab application right there at our fingertips within AppStream. So this gave us the best of both worlds. We had AppStream where students could get a true desktop experience, but it would still be ephemeral, just like our physical labs, with all the elastic scaling capabilities, so that we could meet the demand as things unfolded. And it really gave them that really familiar desktop of a physical lab with just about all the same software that they had in their physical lab or departmental labs. The way we ended up serving it up was via Inside ND, which is our campus portal, where we partner with different groups across campus, building out several different stacks based off of the performance needs for each of so what engineering and science needed from a higher end graphics side. We could get away with a little bit of a less configuration for our standard general purpose labs. And it really helped us divide things out from a support ownership and lab ownership. So taking this approach led us through the spring of 2020. Students weren't on campus. It positioned us over that next academic year where students were back on campus, but in that distance and sometimes quarantine fashion. But it ultimately set the model for the future, where our campus software could be accessed any device from any location at any time. And that's our story on the Notre Dame side. And I'm going to hand it over to Stephanie Cox to tell you IU's journey.
Thank you, Kevin. I love this slide here that we always lead off with. So very cool. So we are Indiana University. We are offering our virtual solution. We call it IU Anywhere. We literally offer it everywhere to all 8, actually 9 campuses, because we do serve the health sciences on the Fort Wayne campus. I should say something a little bit about the IU Anywhere service. It's been around for about 10 years. I have been at the university for 8 years, so it's been through several new developments and iterations. And I should just say that one thing that I've learned since being at IU is that our service offering is very unique. I have not yet, and I say yet because I just talked to Ohio State this week, found another large institution, one our size, that offers the platform to everybody, to all faculty, staff, and students. And we do that here at IU with a ton of support. I mean, we have our first line, our support center. All of those individuals are rock stars. They take the calls for everything technology facing, but certainly are the big piece for IU Anywhere. And then I have a wonderful small group, but fabulous engineers. I have to take a time to say their names, even though they're not able to present here with us today. I think 5 is a record for presenters. But Ellen Pruitt, Sean Mahoney, and Eric Thomas are also a part of the team. So have to give a shout out to them. So we are a hybrid environment. Unlike Notre Dame, who's fully in cloud, we mostly are on-prem. But in May of this past year, May of 2021, we did move our control plane to the Citrix cloud. So we technically can call ourselves a hybrid virtual environment. And with that changed for our control plane, we also added several new features, many that we haven't still yet been able to deploy. But one of the big things that was added was our ability then to extend to any of the 3 big private or public clouds. So AWS, Azure, which we have a pilot running right now, and also GCP are capabilities for this current environment. We deliver hundreds of applications. We do specialty apps, you know, maybe we're not so great to do SolidWorks yet because you got to have some really great robust hardware there, but we're working on options to do that. But we do offer it from any location and any device. And we end up with about 40,000 students on a calendar year, faculty, staff, and students. I think it's worth noting that we could end up with a lot more, right? Since we offer it to everyone. 40,000 named users really do show up in a year, but never more than 2,000 concurrently. So I'd like to take a minute to let that sink in. We really only have 2,000 concurrent Citrix licenses. That runs all of IU Anywhere. I love this slide, so I had to put it up here. I'm not really going to talk a lot about this award, but it is a perfect time to talk a little bit about the Citrix infrastructure, in particular, the Citrix ICA client and the ICA, not the client, but the ICA protocol. It's the underlying piece that rides underneath RDP that really gives the Citrix connection the stability that I think makes the product worth doing. It's one of the ways that we were able to be innovative and do some extra things around our environment. It works very well in low performing bandwidth issues, right? If you have spotty internet connection, you're going to get probably, I would say, a more robust user experience using your applications over the Citrix protocol than, you know, sitting here at home like I am today, with the reliance only being on my home internet connection. So that's one thing to think about that. We were able back in, I'm going to get my time frame right. So it's probably been about 6 years ago. One of our very first big projects was virtualizing the software that we use over in our dental school. We still have them as a very prominent customer today, oftentimes with, you know, 600 or 700 of those users on daily, and they're actually seeing patients. This is their clinical dental software, and we're really happy that they continue with that partnership with us. In addition, we have partnerships with our own colleagues, right? We have different pieces of other centralized IT components that ask us to do things for colleagues, like the Global NOC. They have a special set of applications that they need for their engineers to work remotely. So we offer a desktop for them. And one of my other colleagues was also able to serve up and do a wonderful desktop for our speech and hearing sciences, where we're actually educating our future audiologists on that software platform. So, and we love our work that we can do for accessibility. That's what really gave us the award back in 2019, when we worked really hard to virtualize a lot of those applications that had not yet been virtualized. And I'm proud to say now that we offer all of those in all of our desktops, and we're able to bring those desktops into IU Anywhere. But I won't steal the thunder there, because that's what Maggie's going to talk to you a little bit about. But I do want to say this before I hand off to Maggie. This desktop that you're looking at right now, this is we call it the IU Anywhere desktop. It's a one-to-many, right? It's actually server OS with a desktop wrap around it. So we get many, many users on this one desktop. And it's, we run the profile so they have the feeling, you know, that the data sticks or the application settings stick with you. But that's just kind of a snapshot view, really quick. I'm trying to go fast and be mindful to give everybody a chance to speak, of an overview of what IU Anywhere looks like today. And now we're going to talk a little bit about what happened in March of 2020 when things went a little crazy.
So click, yeah, there we go. Yeah, okay, so this is where I'm going to kind of pick it up. I mentioned that Stephanie and I had worked over many, many years on one of these specialized desktops that we use for some of our online courses where we have very high performance software and big data sets. So that's kind of where I got into this world. But, you know, as Stephanie said, we had a really robust virtual environment to start with, right? So that was great. But come March of 2020, there were still plenty of quandaries, right? And one of those was Matt Decker, who we're going to hear from in another minute, you know, the manager of student computing, and Stephanie hadn't quite put it all together. Let's just say it that way, I guess. You know, so Matt's over there beating their heads together. They're like, we have thousands of workstations that are about to be locked in buildings that no one can go to. And how are we just gonna let the dust pile up on those things, or what can we do about that, you know? And RDP, of course, was part of the discussion, and everybody shakes their heads when they think about trying to support, you know, 100,000 users over RDP. So we weren't really happy about that. Stephanie just mentioned, you know, the 2,000 licenses and, you know, the virtual machines, and would they be able to resource the existing IU Anywhere environment when it got slammed, when people came back after that good old 2-week spring break that we had. So Stephanie and I were actually on a call about something else, and you know, but this was certainly on our minds, and she mentioned to me that she thought we could pull the STC computers into the IU Anywhere environment and deliver them as an icon. You know, forget the RDP, all that stuff. So I said something a little bit like holy bleep, and I got on Slack. I pulled in my very newly minted director of LT, that was Justin Zemlak, who, if anyone remembers, he got the job a week before COVID hit. And you know, I think Stephanie and Matt maybe had sort of had some passing conversation, but nothing had clicked yet. And I think just pulling Justin in had sort of made them say, oh, really, you two need to talk to each other. So they got on the phone and all the light bulbs kind of went off. And that was what really got us started.
Thank you, Maggie. That's absolutely right. We were able to use SCCM to push the VDA agent to almost 3,000 workstations, and they were all over the place, right? Wherever they had their SCCM ability to load that agent. And then we were able to create, you know, maybe one icon around a certain lab. If it was, you know, A141, there might've been 50 computers in there. There would just be one icon that said that, and the Citrix technology behind the scenes was doing all of the brokering to make sure that the next computer of that name was available. So it's how it was working, and we did a lot of things with it even after that. So I'm going to hand it to Matt Decker, and he can talk a little bit about what happened after we virtualized everything.
Yeah, I certainly thank you, Stephanie and Maggie both. I think I certainly want to reiterate what Maggie was talking about, because it really was a moment where we were thinking through the process of how do we deliver, and what, you know, one of the things we manage is a standardized academic desktop. I mean, it's crossed most of the campuses now in one way or another, and we have applications on there that teachers would need, students would need following, you know, the return to the campus. And so, I mean, we really were just bumping our heads against the wall, me and my engineers. And I remember Maggie saying something, and I remember Stephanie sending me a note and saying, hey, you know, this could be a really good thing. What do you think? And I remember looking up over my computer at my lead engineer, Chris Calabrese, and I said, hey, Stephanie can do this. And I mean, he just shook his head like, that is what we need. So what we did is, as Stephanie said, we virtualized all of our desktops. And what's really interesting about that, and what this graph really depicts, is I think a real big sense of uncertainty. So when we first did this in March, and we start like looking at the logs, we realized very quickly that we're not sure if what we did was the right thing, if people understood what we're doing. And so we had this kind of really slow start. But then through some conversations as a group, we started talking to Kelley School of Business, Chemistry, and some of these other major departments. And they're like, yes, that's exactly what we need. We need to be able to access these workstations and the software that's on them in a way that is remote and that is robust and that is flexible. And Stephanie's solution could do all those things exquisitely. And so you see, when we hit September, especially the Kelley School of Business, they said, hey, could we possibly use this solution to test all of our students who are not on campus? And we're like, yes, we can. And so, Stephanie's team and my team started working together. And as it turns out, over the course of a few semesters, we ended up testing over 6,000 students who never set foot on the campus. Not only not in the United States, they're in the United States, but also, across the world, from Korea and India and all these other countries. They could actually complete their coursework, including their testing. And so as this began to grow in popularity, we see that we started adding things like the music school, as I said earlier, the chemistry. And even to this day, these schools and departments, even though students are back, are still using the solution and request it, which I think is really awesome. So what went from uncertainty turned into what if, what can we do, to a real note of positivity. And we'll talk more about that in just a moment.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, a little feedback there.
So I think I'm going to pick it up. One thing I just wanted to come back to, and what Matt has said about Stephanie's environment, the IU Anywhere environment could do it, and it was familiar. It was familiar to people already, and I think that was a huge win for us. To make the computing resources available to our users was one thing, right? To get them unlocked from just being locked up on campus. But the fact that they did not have to learn how to do anything new was really key. And I also want to emphasize the fact that the way that Citrix manages connectivity and is very forgiving if things drop out for a few seconds, that really allowed more of our remote users to be successful on more devices. So, we're looking at this and thinking, going back to where Notre Dame was, where we were, each university had already a pre-existing strategy, and that sort of dictated at that point how we would pivot quickly. So I don't think there are any surprises there, right? These things don't happen in a vacuum. But we heard so many things about the inequities that were really uncovered during COVID, and the ability for the students to access the resources in a very simple way with that one gateway was really huge. And I think, we're talking about people with Macs, we're talking about people with PCs, we're talking about people with Chromebooks, we're talking about people with phones, we're talking about people with their uncle's 8-year-old Mac that's really slow, but if I can get on to IU Anywhere, it doesn't really matter how slow my computer is. We're really presenting this as like the students really need a dumb terminal. They don't think about it that way, but they're all walking around with one all the time. Can you see it? Come on, phone. It's my phone, right? It's a dumb terminal. So really helping people to see that. And I kid Stephanie all the time and tell her that the tagline for IU Anywhere should be, your hardware shouldn't determine your major. So it doesn't matter if your computer doesn't have the chops to run the software. Whatever Kevin and Brandon were talking about that application, right? Oh my God, it runs on an iPad. I used to like to take out my 2009 Chromebook that was really a crappy old phone processor and start running ArcGIS on it over IU Anywhere. It's really game changing. So coming back to this issue of access, and I think, while the IU Anywhere environment is familiar, this real concept of running things in the cloud, I think is still, it still blows people's minds a little bit, and they have trouble getting their heads around it. So we have this fantastic foundation technically. We're continuing to evolve. Matt and Stephanie's teams continue to meet together. All sorts of projects and ideas and stuff are going back and forth all the time, and I think that's incredibly important. But one of the things that we've really got to work on is raising the awareness of these capabilities. And I think it's gonna need to start a lot with faculty. In talking with faculty, they'll tell me, the students, especially as freshmen and sophomores, they are looking at their faculty members to guide them into how they should do their work, right? What's the best way for me to go do this homework problem? And if they're sort of left to themselves, sometimes they can get into trouble. So, I've been on the front lines with faculty, and many of them just are not very aware of some of the things that we have, or really how best to leverage them. And we're starting to cook up a lot of really interesting ideas of where we could take some of these ideas of virtualization. And I want to hand it back to Matt Decker to talk about some of the things that we're starting to work on.
Yeah, I think one of the most interesting things I tried to allude to it earlier is working with Stephanie's group, and the potential that the Citrix infrastructure has is answering the question about what if, like what if we could do, could we do this? And I think there's been sort of a transition even in learning spaces to say, maybe we can create environments where students can learn anywhere. And so because of this capability, we are looking stronger at centralized locations for software and desktops that through the Citrix portal that Stephanie offers. We've rekindled this notion of putting reliable devices in students' hands, and sort of maybe a little bit leaning away from this really old concept of computer labs, right? Make the applications and desktops available that students are used to in one central location, and then all of a sudden, computer labs really aren't that necessary as they used to be, right? That's a really a driving point. And so that just ignited this whole idea of a laptop initiative. I mean, if you look into some of the other groups inside learning spaces, they've started, the Alcove project, which if you haven't, learned about, you can look it up, but it's, sort of the potential of what a classroom could be. And inside that, they've untethered the instructor, allowing the instructor to be able to work around the room. He's not tied just to a lectern where the workstation is. They're holding their technology. They're engaging with the students in a very personal way. And I think a lot of this is driven by this notion that if we can make it so that instructors and students can have a familiar, standardized learning experience delivered virtually, then they're not tied to anything. They're not tied to a room, a brick and mortar space. They can learn and be educated anywhere they are. And so I think this whole experience, at least for us, is about there's all kinds of possibilities now that we're kind of tied to pre-pandemic. So very positive outcomes.
Thank you so much, Matt and Maggie, Brandon, Kevin. So we're kind of at the end of our presentation, but we have a lot of slides that can pertain to questions, and I'm sure you all have them. I'm starting to see them kind of swell there in the chat. So at this time, we can open it up to questions. We might have Robert read a few of those too, if we have some available.
Certainly. So the first question that came in was Robert Hinchell was wondering if Notre Dame could provide a ballpark number of the cost of your solution, and maybe how that cost changed due to the pandemic, due to COVID.
Sure. So the model for AppStream, and if you go out there and look for AppStream pricing on AWS's website, they'll tell you it's all based off of usage per hour, and the idea of what size machine you're going to have it on. So the cost to run it on what we do like a standard large for our general purpose labs costs like 25 cents per user per hour. And for graphics, it can go up to like 50, then it'll go up to $1.50 an hour, depending on what it is. And then you have two choices. You can either run it in what's called on demand or an always on model. And an on demand model, it takes a minute and a half to spin up, 2 minutes to spin up, kind of what we call like a soft boot. And when the student logs in, and the cost for it to be in standby is like 2.5 cents an hour. So if you decide you want to have 50 computers in a standby mode, do the math on that, 50 times 2.5 cents. And the great part of that is you can scale it up for when you think you're going to need it. So like if we have, we've coded in configuration to have it scaled at a certain level from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m., a different level from 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., and then that overnight hours from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., it can scale up or scale down when less students are going to be using it. And we've actually even set up for one of our master's programs that runs out of Chicago. They meet on weekends for it's like an executive program. So it's like one weekend a month or every 6 weeks or something like that. So we gave them a very customized schedule where based off the day of the week or day of the month, it scales up specifically for them and then shuts down. So based off that usage pattern, it fluctuates, right? So from a budgeting standpoint, it's hard to know. When our engineering, science, computing, again, you were talking about how faculty can really promote it. We had some faculty, once they realized that they didn't have to configure and support desktops for students for like SolidWorks. When they decided to teach their SolidWorks class for like 6 weeks, they said, okay, all the students, you log in, we're going to be using this hot and heavy for the next 6 weeks. That first time that month of billing came in, eyebrows got raised because we were like, wait a minute, for the last 6 months, it's been this, and all of a sudden we have this month where the cost really shot up. But then after that 6 weeks, it came back down where it got into more consistent usage. So you do have those peaks and valleys, but the great part about that is, during the pandemic, we had a lot more usage. And then when the students came back on campus, it dropped back into kind of a lesser. So we didn't have a huge capital expense up front. We just kind of pay as we go type approach. So it's variable if that's helpful, but it kind of explains the model.
And Stephanie, would you like to address the same question from the perspective of Indiana University, and what are virtualization costs, what the solutions costs, and how that might have changed due to COVID?
Yeah, for sure. We were trying to anticipate, right, in early March of 2020, trying to anticipate that need, and we were able to definitely work with our intelligent infrastructure in-house at IU and have quite a large amount of compute and storage memory available to increase our one-to-many, which is our Citrix desktop that actually sits on top of server hardware, that one. But because we chose to kind of also go the route of including the STC existing hardware there, we were able obviously to make a huge jump without any additional expenditure. We already had enough licenses. We kind of made that big pivot and without really any new additional cost for there. So I don't know if that answers your question or not. For this purposes, yeah, it was definitely cost savings.
Yeah, I just add to that really quickly, Stephanie, if you don't mind. What was really cool about that technology, which is still in place today, is that if we graphed the use of resources on campuses right now for students, there's clearly a 10 to 4 peak, right? Students get to campus about 10 o'clock, they compute hard, 4 o'clock, they start going home wherever home is. And I think what we're seeing is a trend where, yeah, that still exists, but then we're seeing another uptick where they go back to their homes and then access these resources that normally they couldn't access because they're at home. Now they can access those things again. And so that curve, that peak is kind of going up to 10, it's kind of peaking out. It's kind of staying high, which means we're getting more out of the machines that we ever have in the history of having physical hardware in spaces. And so that's another bonus for this approach.
And echo that from a some surveying we did of students. So after, running a semester, we did some personalized surveys because we could see who the heavy users were. And we started hitting up some of those students. And what we found was, you have some of these grad school students. So Notre Dame is a lot of students are on campus, right? So it's a residential campus. But, we've got grad students, families that live off campus, and it's not as convenient for them to come back to campus. So they've been ones that have been huge advocates and have been really like the opportunity to be able to say, hey, I can stay home and still do my specialized departmental software and not have to go back into campus at the end of the day to run some stat calculations and things. So it's really helped for those students that are off campus and don't have to come back.
Yeah, I can imagine. One of the things that we're still struggling with, and I wonder if you all are too, not sure why I have that feedback always. But now that they've been able to access the Student Technology Center desktops remotely through IU Anywhere, that need has not really gone away, even though the students are, like Matt was alluding to, physically on campus. So one of the things that we've also been able to implement is some calendaring of when we make those desktops available in IU Anywhere. So right now, some folks are not always happy with us, but we turn them all back on after 10 p.m. When the physical labs close, they all magically appear inside of the portal to log on to.
So I have a couple more questions that I think would be relevant for everybody, but if any of the participants, we have 40 folks who are logged in listening to the presentation today. If any of you have questions, you can put those in chat, or if you want to have more of a discussion, please feel free to unmute yourself temporarily and we'll have the panel answer those questions. While we're waiting for one of those to appear, I'm curious how you, for both campuses, Notre Dame and for Indiana University, how you were able to alert students and faculty and staff of these services that were available as the pandemic rolled on. How did you alert folks that your services were available and that they could use them?
So from Notre Dame's standpoint, this is an area that, especially in the spring of 2020, students were getting hammered with communication after communication after communication after communication. So we really had to be mindful of how are we going to get this message out that it's available? Here's the different options you have, because especially early on, software providers were being very lax. They were saying, hey, we'll give you access to software for free. So they had options of either downloading it to their own laptop or accessing it via virtual. They had a lot of choices. So we started using our normal channels, social networking, email directly. But what we found really, what got the most bang for the buck was when the faculty member themselves were the one that says, hey, if you want to access, I need you to access this software or access this plugin or access this tool, and here's where you go to do it. Students really listen to their faculty. They don't always listen to OIT. When that message comes in their inbox, they just file it and keep right on going. So engaging the faculty was what we really found to be the ones where you would really get a bump in usage, was if the faculty member said, this is what you need to do, the student was like, all right, that's what I'll do.
Yeah, that's great, Kevin. And I would say the same thing. I mean, you talk to people at universities everywhere. For the IT organization to get the attention of the faculty, it's a full-time job. So again, yes, some of the same channels. We often put a global announcement in Canvas. We have the usual channels, right? But it's a hard job to get that to happen. And you saw that a little bit in the graph that we showed when Matt was talking a little bit about the Kelley School of Business. It took some time, unfortunately, for the word to get out that we really had these things available. And yeah, so that's a ongoing conundrum for us.
Great. We did have a question come in the chat. did either of your organizations run into hurdles with licensing for applications and virtual desktops? And how did you overcome those issues? And I want to add to that, did the pandemic help that? I know from during the pandemic, a lot of things changed, right? You could cancel hotel reservations easier. You could cancel flight reservations easier and without penalty because of the pandemic, because we were all going through this global thing. So did you run into any hurdles with licensing for applications and virtual desktops? How did you overcome those? And did the pandemic actually help with some of that?
So yeah, there are definitely software vendors that play more nicely with virtualization than others. And the way they extend their licensing model. And I mean, we understand, like Adobe was one where, in a physical lab institution or setup, you have a shared device license where students can come sit down at that machine and they automatically get a license that's pre-provisioned from the university. In a virtualized environment, they're not allowed to do that. So it's an area where we've approached them on more than one occasion to say, hey, how can we shift this license to be more compatible with a virtual? So not that you can't run Adobe, but you have to have your own Adobe ID and license to be able to do that in a virtual world. So, and so if a student has their own Adobe ID, they can do it, but it's one of the ones that has challenges. So we would hope that as more and more virtual options come into play, that they will adjust how they do their licensing and to be able to have something that's more suitable. But I would say out of the, probably 98% of our software vendors, when we virtualized, we went through the summer and went back and called them all and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Are we okay with this? And make sure it was okay. And we found very few that were like, yeah, that's, we're not up for that. So I would say, we've come out largely okay, but there have been some that a handful that have been more difficult to work in a virtual environment.
Yeah, I kind of want to echo that same sentiment. For certain, we do much better, as everyone is, with OS workstation, right? When you have workstation, and as opposed to server software OS when you're virtualizing. So even though we still do have our one-to-many and our Citrix virtual apps and desktop, which is server OS, serve to many, that one is becoming more difficult, harder to maintain. It's easier to use desktop OS for your virtualization. And we obviously didn't really have any of those headaches to worry about at the March. We always had them, but they weren't, I guess it wasn't more problematic because we were just leveraging the existing hardware that was all around all the campuses. I see someone else here. I'm looking in the chat too, just to help you out a little bit, Robert. Someone asked, what dental applications are you deploying with the IUVDI? So this is the Axiom suite. There are several other applications that kind of go along with that stack. And if you email me after, I can tell you them. I don't recall them off the top of my head, but Axiom is the main clinical software application piece.
So we're almost to the end of our hour. I want to thank the panelists for being very efficient with your presentation today. Is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, remembering that we are recording? So if you want to let the larger audience that might be viewing the recording later have any final thoughts, what might those be?
Yeah, I'd just like to say that, thanks on behalf of Notre Dame for asking us or allowing us to present our story. We've even though we've approached things from a different perspective, I think we all have the same heart and mind when it comes to the concept of virtualizing applications and virtualizing desktops to be able to provide that access to anybody from any device. And like I think Maggie said, don't let your device control limit what you need to do, because if you can virtualize it it levels the playing field for everybody.
Yeah, I think it's a good reminder to continue to invest in innovation and strategy. If we had not been already invested in understanding this technology in 2019, we would not have been able to respond nearly so well when COVID hit. So it's just a good validation of that approach.
I think I'd add, don't be afraid to collaborate. I think, we all do our jobs. I think most of us are very invested and we do our jobs well. And I think sometimes just taking a pause and looking up, I think without, Stephanie's group, we both had phenomenal services, both very strong, but together they were absolutely amazing. I mean, the things we've done in a couple of years have been astonishing, and they've opened up the door for all kinds of new innovations. So just taking a moment to look around is very powerful.
Thank you all very much. I did post in the chat the fact that we will have a recording of today's presentation available within a few days. If you're interested in either one of these universities, you can go to nd, as in Notre Dame.edu, to visit Notre Dame's campus online virtually. For Indiana University, we are at iu.edu. And for our tech area, which hosts IU Anywhere, rt.iu.edu stands for Research Technologies. And thank you all very much for coming.